As you guys know, here on the Talaria Boys channel, we compare all sorts of electric dirt bikes and e-bikes. Now, we're called the Talaria Boys because we each started with our own Talaria Sting model. We picked this over a Surron model, but today we're going to be comparing a built modded Talaria to a built and modded Surron. Both these bikes are pretty heavily modified and have similar upgrades, but there's sort of some differences here in between them. We're going to also be going on a ride, trading back and forth between the two bikes, talking about what we like, what we don't like about each bike once they are heavily modified and you kind of get rid of a lot of those stock parts. Let's get into it. If you guys are new to these electric style dirt bikes or electric motos, this is a Talaria brand. This is called the Sting R. This is the Surron brand. They are direct competitors. This bike's been around for a little longer. It's called the Light BX, but both of these here are heavily modified, and here on our channel we've gone over a lot of the builds on these and compared a lot of the differences. But right now we're going to quickly go over the builds that these have, the aftermarket parts that are on them, and then we're going to head out on the trail and actually compare the major differences that these two bikes have. So first off, we'll talk about the Talaria. So this is a Sting R, as I mentioned. I have upgraded Manitou Dorado Expert forks. These are a very high-end fork, upgraded light, upgrade Warp 9 stem, carbon NV bar. I have TRP DHR Evo brakes, which are some of the best in the business. Giant rotors to go with them, Rip & Moto 250mm rotors. My bike is sitting on Warp 9 18-21-inch wheels with much larger moto tires than come stock. I have a Von Cat 10.5 rear shock. I have Warp 9 peg lowering kit, pegs, and adjustable kickstand. Warp 9 axle blocks, Warp 9 sprocket, blacked out chain. I have a 72-volt battery, 42 amp hour, and I have a KO Nano controller. So that pretty much goes over all the upgrades that are on this bike. It's between a $12,000 and $13,000 build. By the time you buy this bike stock and you add all these parts, it's a pretty heavily modified bike. The Surron is kind of in a similar spec here. So we have a Surron Light BX. This bike retails for about $4,500, same cost as a Talaria. We'll start here up front in sort of the same category here. We have a Fast Ace front fork. We have Hayes Dominion A4 brakes, also a fantastic brake. They are sitting on Warp 9 220mm rotors. We also have the same set of Warp 9 21 18-inch wheels. We have a Pro Taper riser bar, same Warp 9 direct mount stem. We have Warp 9 lowering blocks, pegs, kickstand, same as my bike. We have Warp 9 suspension linkages. This is a little bit of a riser linkage to raise the back of the bike up. We have an EXT Arma rear shock. This is a very high-end rear shock, pretty much the best of the best rear shock. We have a Charge Cycle Works rear sprocket, upgraded chain, that 18-21 wheel set as I mentioned, and he is running a 60-volt upgraded battery. This is a 60-volt 53 amp hour battery, and he's running an eMoto Bros BAC 4000 controller. So both the controllers on this bike are sort of the budget, lower power upgraded controllers. They are both running about 12 kilowatts for this video. As I mentioned, mine is 72 volt, his is 60 volt, but they both perform very similarly, just feel slightly different. So now with going over all the specs, we're gonna head out on that ride and we're gonna actually ride them, tell you about how they feel, and then go over some of the major key differences of these bikes. But first, I wanna say one thing about these bikes. Now, in my opinion, the Talaria looks way better. However, the Surron has a party piece, and that is that it's a lot lighter of a bike. It's lighter stock and it's lighter modded. I'll quickly go over the weights of these bikes. We just weighed them. So my bike weighs a whopping 164 pounds. Now that is a good 20 plus pounds heavier than a stock Sting R, and that's because of the bigger battery. Like, there's a lot of upgraded parts on this, especially the wheels and tires are one of the main contributors to the added weight of this bike. Now the Surron here, it also has big heavy wheels and tires, and it is 150 pounds. So this bike weighs 14 pounds lighter than that bike. The batteries essentially weigh the same. They're the same size of a battery. This bike even has a fork that weighs about 3 pounds heavier than my Manitou Dorado Expert, which is a very light fork for these bikes. So the reasons why this bike are lighter, which we'll talk about in depth on our ride, are not all benefits. The bike is lighter, which is a great positive, but they're not all great things. And there are some things that we like about the Talaria better, which add weight. So now we're gonna talk about
Stoked Electric. They reached out to us. They're a Utah-based company. They sent us out some awesome merch. Lance has the shirt on right now. They've got all sorts of stuff on their website. Definitely go check it out. We'll flash some of those on screen. Our favorite thing is their windbreaker. It's water resistant, keeps you warm. It's great. We use it every ride. So far, what we've tried is really high quality stuff. You guys should head over to their website, grab a hoodie, grab a windbreaker for this upcoming fall season. It'll be great. Now we're gonna hit the trails, see what this Surron's all about.
All right, guys, we are out on a ride. We are headed towards the trail. This is Lance. I am on my Talaria, so I'm very comfortable on this bike. I know what it is. I know what it feels like. I'll be jumping on the Surron later to kind of do some comparisons. I have ridden that specific bike before on a long trail ride, so I am very comfortable on it as well. But quickly, let's go over what we're going to talk about in this test. So we're mostly going to be going over the differences between a Talaria and a Surron that cannot be changed. So obviously you can upgrade nearly everything on these bikes, but there's a few things that need to stay, such as the frame, the swing arm. There is an aftermarket swing arm for the Surron, but not for the Talaria. The gearbox on a Talaria needs to stay. The belt drive on a Surron needs to stay, although we'll talk about some changes on that you can make. Anyway, there's a few things that are the way that they are for each bike, and so that's going to come down to personal preference, which you think is better. We'll also talk about why a Surron is so much lighter than a Talaria, and we'll go over kind of the general feel of both bikes and essentially why we all chose a Talaria Sting over a Surron. Even though the Surron is still a fantastic bike in a lot of ways, it's just different.
Finally getting out on the trail. First, I want to give a huge shout out to our boy Sheldon. He lives up the street from us. He's letting us borrow his completely built out Surron, and this thing is an absolute beast. If you like the content that we produce, definitely please consider liking and subscribing. We've got tons more on the way and tons that we've already done on the channel.
Okay, we're gonna get on some gnarlier trails in a minute. But what I was saying is we're going to talk about the upgrade path on each of these bikes, because there are a ton of upgrades available, and up until now everybody says that you should buy a Surron if you're going to upgrade it, because they say there's way more upgrade parts available for that bike. And that was true. That's been the case for a long time. However, now Talaria has caught up. All the aftermarket manufacturers have caught up with aftermarket parts for the Talaria Sting, and so pretty much anything you need you can get for this bike, and you can mod it exactly like you would mod a Surron. There are a few minor things that you cannot get for a Talaria that you can for a Surron. However, they are not really necessary things. They're like some certain carbon fiber plastic parts or body panels or fit and finish items that really do not matter to how the bike rides. And I'm just not really that interested in spending my money on those parts. It just doesn't matter to me. I like to buy stuff that actually makes a difference on my ride. Okay, we are out on the trail ride, and we stopped to compare the key differences between the Talaria Sting R and the Surron X Lite B that you cannot change. I mentioned that before while I was riding. There's a few critical differences that make these bikes different, and you can't change them, even with mods. So, main difference is the Talaria Sting R has a gearbox. Now, this is what the motor is connected to, and it is a gear reduction system, and so it comes back, and it is what connects onto your chain that actually spins your wheel. So, we actually like this better than what the Surron has. Let's see what the Surron has. So Surron has a belt reduction. So it actually has a belt that connects inside here to the motor. Comes out, you can actually see right here, this is a belt. It's a more open system, and then it connects over here to the chain. So it's a very simple system, very open system, and this is one of the key differences that makes the Surron light. However, we don't like the belt system very much because, for one, it is louder. For two, it cannot handle the amount of power that the Talaria gearbox can handle. It also can slip and wear down if you ride in rough, like water, mud, like rough terrain. Your belt will eventually wear down and snap. So a lot of Surron riders actually carry a spare belt in their backpack. Just kind of annoying in my opinion. The gearbox, you do have to do a gearbox oil change, but you only have to do this on a really quick break-in at 180 miles and then not again for 3,000. So it's very, very minimal. It's easy to do, just pretty simple process. But that is one of the key differences that makes Talaria different from a Surron and why the Talaria is heavier. But we like it. It's bulletproof, it's smoother, quieter, like I said. Now there's one thing you can change to the Surron belt drive to make it a little bit more robust, and that is actually switching out the belt for a chain drive. So you can throw a chain conversion on there, but we've tried one of those and it is even louder than a belt, and it kind of like feels grindy to me. Again, we like the gearbox better. The belt drive, the chain drive, they're just not our favorite thing. And even once you go and spend $15,000 upgrading your Surron, the best that it can be, that may hold you back compared to a Talaria. And it's just something you can't really change. So the next difference is obviously going to be the frame on these two bikes. They're not the same bike, so they're going to have a different frame. The Surron frame is a little bit lighter, and that's one of the differences that makes this bike lighter, but it is also a little bit more flexy and flimsy. We're not saying this frame's going to snap in half on you. People do crazy stuff on these bikes, but when you ride it, it does feel a little bit more flexy and flimsy, especially the rear end of the bike. This rear swing arm does flex more, especially when you put bigger and heavier tires and more power to this bike. You can upgrade the rear swing arm on a Surron, but it costs tons of money, like $1,000 to $2,000 depending on which swing arm you go with, and that's a lot of money to just change the back end of your bike. So on the Talaria, the frame is a little bit more robust. There's actually more cross members and things that do make the frame feel stiffer. The back of the bike also feels stiffer. This is a stiffer swing arm than comes on the Surron. There is no aftermarket upgrade to upgrade the swing arm on the Talaria, but we've never felt like we needed it. On a Surron, we feel like we need it. So that's just another great thing about the Talaria. It's just a little bit heavier, a little bit better built, but you don't really need to do anything about it. So real quick, the key differences that we went over are the Surron frame being a little bit lighter weight, but also a little more flexy than the Talaria. The Surron has a belt drive, which is significantly lighter than the Talaria gearbox. However, it's louder and cannot hold up to as much power or abuse as the gearbox once the bikes have been upgraded. Stock, it's just fine. Don't worry about it. Stock. We went over the rear swing arm, how there is an upgrade for the Surron that you can add, and it does strengthen it, and it can also lengthen the bike out. There is no need to do that on Talaria. We feel it is totally strong, works well. And that's another thing I actually love about the Talaria that I forgot about, is that it has a slightly longer wheelbase. So it's not much, but it is noticeably different, and it adds a little bit of stability when you're going fast, especially on dirt roads. So now with those are the key differences between the bikes. Now they just feel a little bit different. So now we're gonna head back out on the trail. We're gonna hit a more tighter single track and kind of compare the weights and how they feel as we ride. And then we'll kind of sum it up at the end.
Right out of the box, the Surron only weighs 125 pounds, where the Talaria R weighs 145 pounds. That weight difference is huge. You really feel it when they're stock. The Surron kind of just feels like a toy, and the Talaria feels very well built. Once you get into the upgrade community and get these bikes fully built, that weight difference is much less noticeable. Once you're pushing way more power, the weights are much easier to handle, and you don't hardly notice them at all. There are a few parts that you can't get for the Talaria that you can get for the Surron, but for the most part, it's just cosmetic stuff. These bikes essentially become almost the same bike once they're completely upgraded. The only key difference is that weight that we've been talking about, but in my opinion, that weight on the Talaria is much needed. It's only because of that stronger, more robust frame and, in my opinion, a better drivetrain system. That gearbox is much more reliable and gonna be able to push much more power through the chain and through the wheels than these belt and chain drive upgrades. If you're interested in any of these upgraded parts that we have on either bike, definitely hit up Charge Cycle Works, where they've got a link down in the description. Use code Talaria Boys for 5% off.
I just hopped on the Surron, and now I have spent quite a bit of time on this bike on off-road rides with our buddy Sheldon. We go ride quite a bit, and we love to trade bikes back and forth just to kind of experience everybody's different ride and everything. We're gonna hop on this tight, twisty, steep Utah trail and kind of see the differences. So I do notice the weight of the Surron. It is a little bit lighter. You can tell, but what it comes down to, I think, is that all the weight that's different is not rotating weight, if that makes sense. So you notice weight a ton more when the weight is rotational. So if this Surron had way lighter wheels and tires, yeah, I would notice the weight a huge difference, because that weight has to get spun up and spun down every time you brake, every time you pull the throttle, every time you go around a corner. Every time you do anything, the weight is a huge difference. But the difference between the Talaria and this Surron is they're both fully built. They both have big wheels and tires. They both have the same amount of power. Shell's really steep, but you just don't notice the weight that much because it's all right between your legs. It's here, it's in the frame, it's in the gearbox, you know, it's in all those places. And you just don't notice weight like that near as much as you do rotational weight. Now, I don't hate this belt system. It's fine. I just like the gearbox better. And I especially like it better when you're pushing big power and for just straight up reliability. I do not want to carry a spare belt and have to trade it on a long trail ride if something happens. I ride in the rain, I ride in the mud. I really rely on my bike to get me home in all the crazy situations that I put it in. And it's been able to do that. It's been super reliable. I actually have over 5,000 miles on a Talaria. I've ridden that much on a Talaria, and I've never had it not get me home. And that's a lot to say. I'm not saying a Surron wouldn't have got me home all those times. It definitely could have, but I have a lot of trust in the Talaria Sting. It's a great bike, and the Sting R is an incredible value. So I think regardless whether you're upgrading it or not, Sting R is the bike to purchase.
We finally made it to the top of our hill, and now we're starting our descent. So that gives us a good time to talk about linkages. As you know, the Talaria makes some noises in the back, just those linkages clanking around, all the stuff back there. And people like to rip on that a lot. But what we've noticed is that the Surron makes just as many noises, they're just a little bit different. Even with the Surron's upgraded linkages that they have, it still makes those noises. These bikes are always gonna make a little bit of noise. There's always gonna be a little clanking. That's just how they are. It's actually amazing how Talaria and parts manufacturers for Talaria have been able to keep up with Surron. It's not till recently that all the parts have been available, but there are so many aftermarket parts. And for Talaria only being out for a year and a half, that's a pretty big deal.
Real quick, I just wanted to say, even though both these bikes are very heavily upgraded and modified, they both have stock motors. So that needs to be kept in mind on some of these things we've talked about. In my opinion, the Talaria Sting R motor is a far superior motor than the stock motor on this Surron. It has more available power to use when you're upgrading. So when you upgrade the Talaria, you can upgrade it further than a Surron stock motor. Obviously, you can buy aftermarket motors for both of these bikes, but that's like $1,500. So that's one of those upgrades that if you can get away with not doing a motor upgrade and still have a great motor on your stock bike, from your stock bike, then obviously you want to do that. All right, guys, we are almost done with this ride. We're gonna wrap it up here in a second, but just to go over what we've talked about, we have the modded Talaria, the modded Surron. At the end of the day, we are happy that we decided to purchase the Talaria Sting to do our builds on. We feel it is a little bit better platform for building. We think that the little bit heavier weight that you have is worth the differences in the frame, in the gearbox, in the motor. Those things we talked about, I think, are worth the extra weight, and it's not as noticeable as you might think. At the end of the day, both these bikes are amazing machines. They're awesome to get out and ride on. They're gonna both do the same thing, and you're gonna be able to have a ton of fun on them. But thanks for watching, guys. Again, if you are interested in purchasing a bunch of aftermarket parts, hit up Charge Cycle Works. They're a local Utah company to us. We have a discount code that'll be down in the description of the video. They sell brakes, batteries, controllers, wheels, tires, everything you guys could need. So head on over there. Thank you to Sheldon for letting us use his 6 Surron. We're gonna have to get out and ride with him soon. But thanks for watching, guys. We'll catch you next video. See ya.